to it. We're meeting, as you know, 35% of Canada's energy needs. We're the fastest growing energy end use in the country.
Yeah.
We're the most affordable. We've got industrial, commercial, residential customers coming to us all the time, asking us how to get natural gas if they don't get it already. We've got, some of your colleagues on the back bench saying to us, what do we do to get gas into our ridings if we don't already have it? So and that's the general context. It's a great place to be. In the context of COVID, our response is, okay, what's best for us to do to help generate that economic recovery quickly? And it applies today as much as it does in October. What are your thoughts on that? What do you recommend to us in the downstream gas industry to help with the recovery?
I think, a few things that we know. By the way, I apologize for the noise in the background, but they decided to start construction on a new sidewalk on my street just in time for this interview. This is what it is to be
the great thing
home.
about COVID is that dogs go past, children run by, construction occurs.
The dogs are good. I can't deal. I haven't. The dogs will obey me for the most part and will work for treats. The construction guys across the street, not so much. I think the most important thing, my most important message, I think, as we go through this period of transition, and I think, one of the things we've seen with COVID is it seems to be in the business world and in the political world really accelerating trends and exacerbating differences and inequities. So it's causing all of us, I think, to both in the energy industry and more largely in society, to confront things much more quickly than we thought we would have to. There are some things that don't change. There will be no economic recovery without our oil and gas sector. And that is a point that I was making in February, and it's a point I make with even more vigor now. We are the fourth largest producer of gas in the world. We are the sixth largest exporter of natural gas. This is, energy is our family business. It's what we do. It supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country. And it is an export that's poised for more growth. We got $6.1 billion in exports in 2018. We're poised to become one of the world's cleanest producers, supplying both domestic and global markets for natural gas. And it provides affordable power and heat to communities right across our country. So we need this industry to power our economy, and we need our economy powered in order to lower our emissions and do the things that we know that we will need to do for the future. You don't transition an economy by pulling the plug out on it. We have to be methodical about this, but we understand the urgency of it, and it's an urgency. We'll talk about it perhaps throughout this interview, but it's an urgency that is not only just about the climate anymore or combating climate change. It is where investments are going. It is how things are moving. I get my information on renewables increasingly not from renewables trades magazines, but from The Economist and the Financial Times. This is going mainstream business now. This year is the first year that investments in renewables are beating out non-renewables. So, and one thing that I know is that natural gas particularly is going to be an essential part of the mix. I've spent a lot of time with Fatih Birol and the International Energy Agency. You used to have to travel to Paris in order to attend those meetings, which I'm told was a very nice thing to be able to do. But because I'm a recent minister and mainly under COVID, I've not been to Paris. But we Zoom all the time. And they're forecasting that natural gas will, the global demand is going to continue to grow for decades to come, even as those renewable sources of energy increase their market shares. So gas is in a prime position to lead the clean energy transformation. You got, clean tech investments coming from the oil and gas sector of about $1 billion a year in this country. That's 75% of the total coming from oil and gas. Per barrel emission reductions, 30% over the past 20 years. We know we got to do better, but that is considerable. And that's thanks in part to the electrification of natural gas production, which we've seen and which we want to increase, as well as liquefied natural gas products on the West Coast. And I think there's similar potential for the East Coast. I was reading the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago, and it was, like I said, increasingly you're seeing these articles and these editorials coming from them, and FT, obviously very pro-business periodical, but they said resisting the pathway towards renewables has been recognized as both futile and bad business. So for anybody in the energy market, it's something you got to look at. It's something you have to take into account. And natural gas is poised to do that. I think we, as a major player, but also a smart player, we can foresee the products that people need. We see where investment is going, and we know how to follow the money. And what I remember when I was at Globe at the Clean Tech Conference in Vancouver, largest in North America, and I said that to them. I said, look, we're the sixth biggest producers of natural gas, fourth of oil in the world. We're not reaching net zero without our oil and gas sector in this country. We're not reaching it. The road to net zero in Canada goes through Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador, and BC. And the next day, as it just happened by coincidence, I was co-hosting an innovation summit in Calgary with Sonia Savage. And it was then that the decision on BlackRock had come down, and since then we've seen Deutsche Bank and other players, and it was kind of hitting them that this is where Canada's energy industry was in some people's crosshairs. And my answer to them was, a prosperous prosperous oil and gas sector in Canada needs net zero. And my message was, it's not about just the environment anymore and the noble cause of combating climate change. It is a noble cause. This has become a strategic economic imperative. This has become a competitiveness imperative for our country, because it's where the money's going. And our great concern is that for money managers around the world and for investors, whether they're in New York or London or Zurich, they look for boxes to check. Mm-hmm. And the picture I paint is a money manager, a portfolio manager sitting on the end of the boardroom table and looking down at his juniors and saying, "What are we doing about climate change?" And one puts up his hand and says, "We're not investing in Canadian energy." Box to check. That is dangerous, and that cannot happen, and it is happening. So we have to combat that. And I said, look, on the other side of the ledger, the box to check in terms of, is this jurisdiction doing something about climate change, is becoming net zero. Mm-hmm. They're looking for jurisdictions that are committed to net zero emissions by 2050. And, I'm here in Newfoundland and Labrador. A month and a half ago, the legislature here unanimously passed a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. And, we are one of the three major oil and gas producing provinces in the country. So that was a big deal. And they see which way things are going, and they're moving. That's what we got to do.
Now, Minister, you've called it yourself a moonshot. It's an aggressive target that your government set. And I take your point that there are other players who are calling for it. And yet you consistently, as you just have, you make the point that the oil and gas sector, you're going to be working with them to pursue any targets that you do set. But there are lots who are keen on those targets who say that they cannot be pursued with this sector. And I'd say, frankly, there are lots who are supporters of yours and your government's views. What do you say to them when they say, when they're looking at passing municipal bans on natural gas or doing other things like that? Like, what's your response to them?
I'm here on a very nice day, actually, 25 degrees and sunny, which doesn't happen very often here in St. John's. I am zooming to you from the furthest eastern point of North America, a rock literally in the middle of the North Atlantic. I grew up here, and I grew up in a community in Labrador, a fly-in, fly-out community in the north. You grow up in a community like this, you don't have time, you can't afford idealism. I deal with the world, people here deal with the world as it is. And the fact of the matter is we are the fourth biggest producer of oil in the world. We are a major producer of natural gas. On the flip side of the ledger, we're the second biggest hydroelectric producers in the world too. We're tier one nuclear. We've got a mix here, but the point being that there are too many people, unfortunately, in this country who don't have the proximity that I do,
Right.
or people, let's say in Alberta and Saskatchewan, do to the number one wealth creator in this country. If I cross the street and look out at the harbor in St. John's, I see supply ships going out to those rigs all the time. I'm reminded of it every day. This is real. And what I say to those people who you point out, say that you got to just turn it all off. I say that's not dealing with reality. I'm ambitious. I'm an environmentalist. I believe in lowering emissions. I believe in net zero by 2050. And because I believe in it and I'm real about it, this is reality. This is what change looks like. It's making tough decisions. You can't indulge in just, snappy speeches anymore that says we're saying no to that and yes to this. Nope, that's not how we get there. And it is particularly not how you get there in a democracy. You grow up in a marginal province, and I grew up in Labrador too, which is like the margin of the margin. And government is sometimes a faraway thing that is not in keeping with the reality as you see it on the ground, right? You don't feel included. Labrador, for instance, doesn't, for years, some still doesn't feel part of this province. St. John's is like the other. Similarly, this province doesn't always feel it's represented in Ottawa. It feels like, it's not heard. If we do not include people in this, in lowering emissions, it will not happen, because they will choose another government that will include them, where they do feel included. And that government may be, either represent the status quo, or maybe not be as ambitious as we are, or worse, we'll pull things back, as we've seen in the United States. In the Trump administration, when you look at the climate goals that the Obama administration put, that is the fact of a democracy. So people need to feel included in this change. I don't even like saying transition, because frankly, look, especially COVID right now, people were dealing with enough change in the economy and enough churn, particularly in this industry. With COVID, the last thing that they want to hear is about more change or transition.
Yeah.
I keep my eye on the prize, which is lowering emissions. And how do we do that? And we were able to do, one of the ways we were able to do it during COVID very early on was to build on something that we were already working on, which was in inactive and orphan wells. And that has, that kind of hit the sweet spot. There's not very often in politics, particularly, as you point out, the question, such a divisive debate about energy and our energy future in this country. But when you have Premier Kenny and Elizabeth May both agreeing with you, you're onto something. And that's where we were with inactive and orphan wells. It was something that we had been working on with the governments of Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC for some time. We put $1.7 billion to it. It's good work that needs to be done, and will employ tens of thousands of good workers with experience, talented skill, the people that we need, people who we need to make sure are doing good work until kind of everything starts to right itself. In some spaces, it's already starting to right itself, but I think that's what we got to do. We've got to be, the three things I keep repeating is that we've got to be smart, in that we've got to use that ingenuity, frankly, that we used in order to get oil out of sand in the oil sands, for instance. That is remarkable. That was an incredible feat. And suddenly we find ourselves here, a top 5 energy player in the world.
Yeah.
When I do those Zooms, by the way, with the IEA and the World Economic Forum and the G20, we've all learned now that on large Zoom calls, there's a hierarchy. Did you make the first screen?
Yeah.
In the gallery view.
Sure.
And I kept making the first screen. I thought I was particularly engaging. It's not. It's because I'm the Minister of Natural Resources for Canada.
Right.
And everybody is looking at us for those reasons. So, we've got to be, I'm very proud of where we are. I'm very proud of what we've been able to do. I'm very proud of the fact that we're, such a large player in gas and in oil. My argument now is, okay, that ingenuity that we had before to get to where we are, we've got to use that as well now in order to lower our emissions.
Yeah.
And I do it because we did this, and I think we can do that. I really do. We need to be very thorough as well. We can't overlook stuff. And I think one of the big things we overlook really, and I'm very hot on this, and it comes back to my message on inclusivity, is efficiencies. Like home efficiencies, like retrofitting your home, retrofitting buildings, new building codes. That is that's our almost our first fuel as we're looking at fuels that we can use is the efficiencies. We can reach 1/3 to 1/4, or 1/4 to 1/3 of our Paris Accord targets through efficiencies, which is remarkable. And then I think, as I said before, we got to be thoughtful. We got to make sure people are included. And look, we've been doing good work here on ESG. We're ranked at the top with Yale. A lot of we're seeing kind of Europeans, particularly Total, I think most recently, coming out of the oil. And so a lot of them, I believe, are going by information that just looks at, in the case of oil, it's just looking at emissions per barrel and isn't looking at what we've been able to do to lower those emissions over the past 20 years, which has been remarkable. We need to build on it. But yeah, I think that's where we are.
Well, I share your reservations about the word transition, because it does suggest, I think, what some of those who are keen to stop using fuels altogether want to suggest. And
I would actually build on it, Tim, and something that Jonathan Wilkinson actually brought up to me, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, is that it's not about the source of emissions; it's about just lowering emissions.
Uh-huh.
Right? We got to get out of this targeting certain industries or certain, thing. Our goal here is just to lower emissions. That's our goal.
And on that,
not lower their emissions and their emissions, their emissions. We just got to lower emissions.
Right.
And that's a very important point. When you talk about net zero by 2050, the important word to remember there is net.
Uh-huh.
Right? There will still be emissions, and there will be other things that will offset those inevitable emissions, right? Yeah. But we'll still emit. We just got to emit a heck of a lot less in order to reach 2050, and in order to reach the goals we've set for 2030 as well.
Right. Well, and on that, your department recently set up a clean fuels branch, and we were quite interested in this. We started to talk with some of your officials about it, because it identifies renewable natural gas, and it identifies hydrogen, and we were thrilled by that. Minister, you noted electrification earlier. As you no doubt know, electrification is at times quite troubling for us if it's suggesting getting off of our fuel and off of our infrastructure. And we want to make sure that there's a competitive market, not picking favorites. And your Clean Fuels branch has identified renewable natural gas and hydrogen as priorities. And we love that, because we'd say, okay, if you've got these targets, if you can recognize that they can be pursued in a variety of ways, including through gaseous fuels. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what your thinking is on RNG and hydrogen, and where you see them playing in the mix going forward.
Well, one of the things we want to do, I think, right off the bat, is build on your natural gas innovation fund. I think that's very important to all of this. And the funding that you're helping to supply, it invests in clean tech right across the natural gas supply chain. I think it's going to be game changing in areas like methane reduction and sustainable production. The help that you're providing producers and distributors to improve environmental performance, to maintain that competitive edge, I think that we have. We have a strong relationship with you in addressing all of those challenges through the memorandum of understanding that we have together, and the creation of the new Clean Fuels branch. It's within my department's low carbon energy sector. It's kind of the next step, I think, in the progression of our relationship. The branch builds on on other existing work that we have, the National Hydrogen Strategy out this fall, our new emissions reduction fund to Environment Canada and their development of the Clean Fuel Standard. The idea here, I think, is to specialize but not be myopic. I mean, that's, I think you can be both. there are certain areas where we know we've really got to drill down. But at the same time, we got to make sure that everybody's working together. And you can't do one at the expense of the other. As I said, we've got a huge competitive advantage in natural gas. We want to keep it, and it will be integral to lowering emissions broadly, but also the other things that we're doing, whether it be in methane or in a clean fuel standard.
We just delve a little bit deeper on hydrogen. You noted the strategy coming out this fall. I know you're in the midst of consultations on it, so I appreciate that you haven't got a final view on some aspects of it, but we see ourselves as front and center in that strategy, because that's about a hydrogen strategy fundamentally involves moving a gas through a pipe, and that's what we're really good at. In fact, as natural gas 100 years ago had a significant component of hydrogen in it because it was town gas, largely derived from coal. So we feel we have a certain history and familiarity with hydrogen already. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you want to go with that hydrogen strategy, given that some provinces have already started to speak out on it quite strongly, like Alberta and provinces across the country are looking at it. But any thoughts you want to share on it?
Well, we have a great history in hydrogen dating back about 100 years in Canada. And some of us are old enough, me, I remember driving or riding a hydrogen bus at Expo 86 in Vancouver. And there were a fleet of hydrogen buses as well at the Vancouver Olympics. I think it's a technology that's been waiting for its moment. And I think the moment has come. And I think that we're well positioned for it. I mean, we have expertise in batteries, we have expertise in transportation. I was speaking with the Danish ambassador to Canada, and she just brought up the fact that Ballard out of BC is powering buses at the University of Copenhagen. And companies like Ballard, kind of the top 11 hydrogen companies, the benchmark companies, they've seen an increase of 300% in their share prices on average over the past year. And some of that, if you ask me, what success looks like, I mean, it would be obviously a globally competitive industry. It would be, vehicles, a massive increase, particularly in 18-wheelers and transportation. Those vehicles where electrification, for instance, is not as easy. I mean, for smaller cars, for passenger cars, it's easier. For 18-wheelers, we're looking at hydrogen, and we want to get very aggressive on research and development in steel and in domestic heating as well. 10 years ago, if you looked, for instance, at offshore wind, it was impossibly expensive, and I think that ESG has had a big effect on that, and the transparency that Canada has and the European market has opened the books. And so you're seeing Europe now, they want 40 gigawatts of hydrogen power by 2030, and they're looking at green hydrogen made without fossil fuels, and they're putting up roughly 40 billion euro. Which is a huge amount of money, 9 billion from Germany alone. Frankly, that's good news for Canada. I think it will certainly cause us to be more ambitious, and I think that's a good thing on hydrogen. It will allow us. Already, we've got a foothold. I'm sure Ballard is in more places than the University of Copenhagen, and so it gives us. We have a competitive edge here. It expands the market. It will expand the demand. As you said, that strategy is coming out in the fall, and we're going to keep working with partners like your membership on how do we make sure that we've got a solid regulatory framework. I have to say, as much as we give red tape a bad name, and Lord knows I've seen enough bad red tape in my day, we do regulatory fairly well. And I think particularly in nuclear, it's actually our competitive edge is the fact that our regulatory is so good and so trusted that the world looks up to it. We want to do the same thing with hydrogen.
Yeah. You mentioned conversations at the IEA. You mentioned the G20, the Danish conversations, a host of other international dimensions. I don't turn the conversation a bit to the international. My side of the gas industry is focused largely on the domestic market, but not exclusively. Several of our members are looking at export opportunities or own international assets. One of the big export opportunity, one of my members, FortisBC, is already an LNG exporter and is looking at expanding that. LNG exports present an enormous opportunity for Canada in general. What more do you think we can do as an industry to build on that message? Because whereas at times the oil and gas industry and your government have, I think there's a common interest and a common vision on the global LNG opportunity that we have. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, yeah, I think it's 47% of Canada's natural gas is exported, and almost all of that, of course, is to the United States. It's kind of the natural trajectory. And at the same time, natural gas imports from the United States into Eastern Canada has been on the rise. I'm happy that I've got a good relationship with the Energy Secretary in the U.S. We were introduced and we bonded because of a pandemic. You can imagine early on, we wanted to ensure that, as borders were closing and such, and we needed to ensure that, right off the bat, that essential workers in the industry were able to go back and forth.
Yeah.
You can't take any of this stuff for granted.
Yeah.
And in Secretary Briette, you got a guy who's been, he's been around the block and he understands how the industry works. He understands how interwoven our economies are, particularly in energy. And so that's been very helpful. But if you look at global forecasts for natural gas is going to continue to grow in the decades ahead, especially as economies around the world move to reduce their dependency on more higher emitting fuels, such as coal. And this is something that's going to be available to them. And you got, of course, $40 billion in the LNG Canada project, largest private sector investment in Canada's history. It's under construction. It's on target. We'll begin exports to Asia by 2025. Suddenly, that's not so far away. Proponents of the industry, actively working to advance, I think, 5 or 6 other LNG projects right across the country. And my department's looking at several of them. I mean, a lot of those under consideration. Electrification of operations in natural gas and LNG production to lower those emissions. We'll lower them by up to 90% below our global competitors. I mean, we are going to produce some of the lowest emitting LNG in the world. And that's how we'll get to net zero. That's what investors want. And we're going to, if you look at things like Alta Gas's Ridley Island propane export terminal, that's a great example of the potential of diversification as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're looking at Japan, or they're exporting to Japan. I mean, that's a great new market for us. So we'll take advantage of our Pacific coast, and I'd like us to take advantage too of our East Coast as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And proximity to the European Union market, and a market of over 500 million people that is going to is demanding, and is going to have extremely tight regulations on lower emitting fuels.
Well, Minister, good way to come around to a final question. You've been involved for what, about a year and a half, or no, a year?
For me, I've been minister now for what was it, November?
Right. So
yeah,
an uneventful 9 months in global events, and we've seen resource markets turned upside down by all of this. Reflections on the role and on the portfolio and its future for our country.
I am definitely somebody who is where he's from. That's a huge part of who I am. And when I was 13, my dad got a job in Labrador. We moved up there. And Happy Valley Goose Bay was a fly-in, fly-out community. It was also the first time I had ever met First Nations people, met in Indigenous people, and the neighboring community to Happy Valley Goose Bay, one of the few places you could drive, Sheshashi. I did not know anybody could live in that way.
Yeah.
And the inequity between my community and their community was stark, and it will have, on a kid, it has a huge impact. And it drove what I did. When I did my undergraduate in political science, I did my thesis on what happens when Indigenous people are confronted with development they don't want, how they mobilize against it. I worked as executive assistant to the Minister of Justice. I worked on 2 land claims tables, we called them at the time. Worked for a year with the Premier as his policy advisor, Premier Brian Tobin back then. And, continued work at those tables with the Inuit of Labrador, and worked on an impact benefits agreement for Voisey's Bay. Went and did my graduate degree in political science, philosophy, and talked about did my dissertation in Indigenous participation in natural resource development. So here I am. I enjoyed a good 15-year career in journalism in between, and now I'm kind of back to where I began, and to something that I feel very passionately about. One of those people I got to know during my career in journalism was Jim Prentice, and Jim's book Triple Crown sits here on my desk. He became a friend of mine. We enjoyed talking to one another. Little known fact about Jim is that he was a huge fan of Canadian Idol. And when I was at CTV, that was an occupational hazard for me. I should call it. I love watching Canadian Idol too. And he would show up in the audience, so we got to know each other. And he'd come to the Junos, and of course CTV loved having a prominent minister like Jim Prentice there, and he'd come with his family, and I always enjoyed talking to him. And we had similar passions in our energy sector, coming from energy producing provinces, in Indigenous issues and in justice for Indigenous peoples, and to end the marginalization that they feel and that they live, in fact, and the environment. And he was a pragmatic guy, and a guy who achieved results. I had a great deal of time for him, and his death was an awful thing. But boy, he stays with me in the book. And the other thing I think it's really important too, that I felt and really was emboldened by him, is the pride that we should feel in what we do. The pride that we should feel in being one of the great oil producing countries of this world, one of the great natural gas producers of this world, one of the great hydroelectric producers of this world, a tier 1 nuclear energy producer. And so, I continue with that. And I think the challenge of our time and what's happened right now with the pandemic is that, not only are you seeing, I think, kind of an acceleration of trends that we could see happening in the energy industry, we're also seeing an exacerbation of the inequalities that are within our society, but also amongst countries. And what I'm heartened by is what we have seen in this country and how we have handled COVID-19. For the most part, as hard as we are on ourselves, and that seems to be the Canadian way, we've done a pretty good job. And the collective will has been there to look after one another. People by putting on a mask, by keeping social distance every day, demonstrate that courtesy of looking after one another. And so we got to move that over, and as with that change, we got to move that over, and move it over to places like doing what we know we need to do as proud, prominent global citizens. We got to lower our emissions. It's imperative that we do that. For the sake of our planet and for the sake of future generations. And we got to look after one another within our country. The inequities that we see, most prominently for me, because I grew up in this way, is between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. But we also know, the Black Lives Matter movement happened here as well, and for very good reason. And for racialized people in this country, the inequities are still too great, and they're bearing out. Who's really feeling the brunt. Most particularly, you see this in the States, but here as well, that they feel the brunt of what happens with COVID-19. But our response to that has been so fantastic. I think not perfect, but pretty good. And we got to just move that over. We got to transition that over to the other challenges that confront us right now. Not easy, but we've done it. We've shown we can do it. And and I think there's a willingness to take these challenges on.
Minister, we're taking a lot of your time. I really appreciate it. Any final words for our natural?
Keep doing what you do. Be proud of what you do, and let's lower some emissions.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. We hope. I realize it's a little later in the day there in Newfoundland. We hope we can get out and enjoy some of that sunshine.
Well, the construction guys are still at it, so it's not. I guess it's not that late. They're still pouring their concrete right across from my house within microphone range. So my apologies to the audience. But anyway,
well,
work goes
I
on, life goes
I
on.
apologize if you heard my daughter playing the piano upstairs or the dog barking in the background.
That's a lovely thing. Both lovely things.
Yeah.
Take care of yourself.
Thank you so much, eh?
Good to see you.
Again.